there's Catherine, and there's Jesse, who you'll hear more from this afternoon as well. My name is Mika, or morning if you're on the West Coast. My name is Mika, and I'm the owner and principal consultant at Vandersal Collective, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this webinar, Reflective Capital Campaigns, Your Community, Your Culture, Your Needs. So we get to know you a little bit during this time. I'm wondering if you can go into the chat and just tell us where you are and a little bit about your context. It'll be helpful to know who's on the other end of this. So just type on in for us where you're coming from and your organization or whatnot. Look forward to reading those. Know that at the end of our time here today, we'll have about 10 minutes or so for community questions and answers. And so hold your questions for that moment, jot them down, and then we'll put them in the Q&A portion of the webinar, and look forward to that further conversation. We're also holding a follow-up session to our time together. And on March the 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we'll be having a regular old Zoom, not a webinar Zoom, to be able to dig deeper with you all, to hear about your own particular context and your questions that have come up since being a part of this webinar. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to continued conversation as time goes on. So a little bit about Vandersal Collective, just a tiny bit before we launch into talking about capital campaigns and the stages of capital campaigns, the 4 stages of success. We are based out of New York City and have consultants all over the country. We are do this work out of our faith and ethical convictions, and we have come here with a significant amount of experience intersecting what we believe and how we believe. We engage and valuing all of humanity into one place. We're women and queer led. We come out of a grassroots fundraising model and community engagement that reflects individual communities and cultures. We don't believe in, as I say, I'll eat cookies out of cookie cutters, but we don't believe in cookie cutter fundraising. We understand how hard it is to do this work, having been on the other side, having been the congregation or the organization engaged in fundraising, and know how much better it is when we have help and can help each other. We've been around about 10 years at this point as an organization. And here's what we say about ourselves, that we offer a radically human approach to reaching people, to raising money, and reimagining the future. We're here for congregations and nonprofits as they face the challenges of communicating, fundraising, and visionary strategic work for a new era. We engage in hands-on support with writing, design, social media, websites, fundraising, and far-reaching discernment of your mission and purpose in the world. We are here to listen, to dream, to imagine, and to make it real. Erin, a little more about who we are, please.
Absolutely. So in addition to all of the stories about who we are and what we are embodying in this space, we also like to let you know a little bit about our professional background. We may be a new organization as Vandersal Collective, but collectively, we've been doing this work for a really long time. Between Mika and I, we have over 30 years of combined experience in fundraising, not to mention the rest of our staff that includes a professional writer, professional designer, professional rock star, a project manager, et cetera, et cetera. Between Mika and I, we have led over 115 capital campaigns, and we know the challenges of finding good consulting work out there. We recognize that we do things a little bit differently, and we do them differently with great intention. Why do we do this? Well, I'll get to that in just a moment, but a bit more about what we bring. We believe in associating ourselves with the very best that's out there. And so we are members of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We have executive certificates in religious fundraising. We have graduate degrees that also inform our work, and we are recognized by the New York State as a woman-owned business. In fact, Mika's role as an owner of this firm is also a validated ministry in the Presbytery of Southern New England. I think it's important for us to lean into the fact that this is a validated ministry, because that feeds into this question, why do we do this? And the reason why, in short, is because we care. We genuinely care about the people and the communities that we serve, because we see this as a reflection of our vocation. We believe that this is ministry, and we take that very seriously. This isn't just mere words that we put into a webinar for you all to hear and appreciate. Rather, because this is part of our work, it's personal. And we develop relationships with those that we are in work with, because we think it's important for us to develop trust together and embody that relational work that we ask our clients to do in their own fundraising strategies. We also believe that this ministry can help form the larger conversation within the church with a capital C. So you will likely see our writings in other areas, because as we are writing and teaching and preaching, we are helping to inform the theological language around money and the relationships to money, bodies, God, alternative economies. And so you'll find our writing, our articles in places like Luther Seminary's Faith and Lead, in Lake Institute's Insights. We're regularly featured in Church Anew alongside Walter Brueggemann. We have an upcoming special issue with Presbyterian Outlook centered on the language of belonging and money. There are numerous articles that are being used by the Episcopal Church Foundation, and recently we published Crisis and Care Meditations on Faith and Philanthropy, which you can find on Amazon or at Wipf Stock. So as you are thinking about a capital campaign, you might be asking, when should I engage in a capital campaign? I have needs. What else do I need? Mika, can you walk us through what are some of the key elements?
Sure. There are 6 or 7 key elements to a capital campaign that require a significant amount of back-end work to get you to the point of being able to engage. And I would say that these pieces actually are keys to success for any kind of fundraising campaign, but you really, really want these to be in place before you engage in some kind of capital campaign. So first, you have to be able to articulate the need. What is the need? What is your vision for the future? Where are you serving? How are you serving? How is that different? What is the need? You need to be able to connect then the projects that you like to be raising funds for, whether they're physical capital projects or something else, with your identity and mission, which means that you also have to really be able to hone in on what is your identity and mission. You need a team. We can't do any of this work alone. We definitely can't do fundraising alone. So you have to be able to have a group of volunteers who are willing to commit to this work together and to be in community with each other. You need potential donors, people who have given to you, to your organization in the past, people who might give in the future, to be able to nurture people to fund this campaign. Once you have your need and your vision, once you have your understanding of what the future might look like, if you're able to engage in the ways that you dream of, you have to be able to communicate that. It makes no difference if you can't tell others about what it is. So the ability to communicate and plans to be able to do so. There's the adage of make the plan, work the plan. What is it? That's not quite right. You know what I mean. You've got to make a plan, and then but making the plan isn't enough. You have to actually work the plan once you make the plan. This is where we come in very much in our work in helping to create plans with discrete bite-sized pieces to make sure that we get from the beginning to the end of our goals. So a plan that is reachable, that's doable, where we can have wins, that includes reaching donors, that includes communicating to your core constituency and wider as well. This last one I think is really important, which is a sense of perspective. We take our work very seriously, all of us on this webinar and beyond. And at the same time, we are one small piece of a much larger world where change is made. So a sense of perspective of how important it is for us to be able to do our work and knowing that we are one small part of a larger web. So once you have these elements, and as you create these elements, they aren't necessarily all together when you begin a capital campaign. There are ways of on-ramping into that space through a variety of different phases. What are the phases of a capital campaign? First is a phase of listening. Listening to your community, listening to your leadership, listening, for those of you who are here from religious organizations, to the sacred, and what are you being called to do, and what you think you're being called to do, how is that reflected in your community? How bought in are they into this vision that you have for the future, in particular with particular projects that come along with that vision? This can be a very intentional phase, can be a less intentional phase, depending on who you are as an organization. Many people come to us asking us to help them in a listening phase. But for instance, Catherine, who you'll hear from at Calvary, we did help y'all at Calvary through a listening phase. Jesse, we did not. Jesse's organization did that on their own without even knowing they were doing it. They came to us and said, "You've already done that." And we said, "You've done that. It's time to move into feasibility now." So that will help you get information that you need to be able to then move into feasibility. A feasibility phase is around 4 months or so, where we are able to take all of your vision for the future, your understanding of your needs, how much they might cost, and to test out what this vision is, along with dollar amounts that come along with them. That phase, as I said, takes about 4 months, where we would interview people, where we would create a potential case statement that we would test, where we would receive many, many surveys, and we would do qualitative and quantitative analysis to be able to give you the roadmap to be able to move into a solicitation part of the phase. Solicitation is the time when we're actually raising pledges for these campaigns, for these projects, right? So the solicitation phase, generally speaking, lasts between 8 and 10 months, sometimes can be longer. And we first do some organization, and then we do an advanced gift phase, and then we do a wider community phase, and then we wrap up at the end. So that is a very intense time. It's a very exciting time. There are lots of highs, lots of lows, and even more highs, I promise you, to get to that end. Catherine can talk about how we've just gone through a bit of a low at Calvary, and now we're on our way up to finish getting into the end of their campaign. And then once we've done that heavy lifting, then there still is post solicitation work to be done, where you are receiving the pledges that people have made, continuing to nurture them, continuing to connect the dots. So those are the 4 phases. I am going to introduce you now to Jesse Wells, who is the campus minister at UKirk SMU, and which is based in Dallas at Southern Methodist University. And we have just completed a feasibility study with them. They were looking to create a new space. They're renting a space of another organization right now, and there is the need for them to have their own space, especially for many of their students who are queer and people of color and do not feel they fit in to the rest of the campus community. They did not receive necessarily the data that they thought they were hoping for, but they received the data that they needed, and they're living into that now. So you'll hear from her, but first I want to show you just a brief, tiny little video of their case statement for feasibility, just to show you a snippet of who they are, so you can get a sense of who they are. There's no sound here. This is just scrolling through for you. So we had their projects, their budgets, how we get there. We were testing, should we permanently own or should they lease? Frequently asked questions. And then the gifts that would be necessary in order to reach their goal. And then a survey. This is the survey that we utilized with them. Everything was done online for this community as they're adept in that format. And then this is the leadership, an incredible number of people who have gone into figuring out this vision. Okay, Jesse. I'm having an issue with my slides. There we go. Jesse, yay. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with the feasibility study and what did you learn during this process?
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here today, and I am eternally grateful that we have entered this relationship and this partnership with Vandersall. We found ourselves in a really big pickle a little less than a year ago. We had been exploring this vision, Nika said, of permanent space, and in particular, we were hoping that we might use our space to generate revenue for the ministry. We wanted to be sort of forward thinking about revenue streams and innovation and sustainability. And so that's a lot to be holding at once, right? It wasn't just, can we raise this money? It was also, we have this vision, but it's still a little bit unclear how we reached our goals. And so we were in this sort of chicken and egg scenario where we needed help making decisions about our vision, but also discerning some of the pragmatic details. And that's why we chose to do a feasibility study. So when we were in that phase of exploring organizations to work with, we interviewed 3 different consulting firms. And it was really clear from the beginning that Vandersall understood and was excited to come alongside of us in this, that it wasn't just another project for them where they were going to send us templates and, sort of wish us well, that it really would be all inclusive. And we really needed that because we're a very small organization. I'm the founding pastor. This is our 4th year of ministry. We have lovely and amazing student leaders. We have a wonderful board of directors, but I'm the only paid staff person. And so this was a big lift for us, just in terms of being able to do something like this. And part of why we chose to work with Vandersall is because when we presented this vision, they didn't do anything to sort of walk us back. They said, yeah, we embrace this. We see this for you. It's a risk and we're willing to jump in there with you and see if this is possible. And that felt really good because we had done a lot of work already to listen and to learn, and to have someone say, yeah, we honor this vision. You're not too small. You're not too young. You're not too scrappy to pursue this was a real gift. And then about the way I think we had a lot of things that popped up in the midst of doing our feasibility study. And I really was grateful for the ways in which Nika and Aaron took a holistic approach in saying, okay, we're focused on the feasibility study, but there are other things happening in your organization that we need to address and we need to talk about. And that was really helpful for me being in this role. So I think most of all, there was a constant mutuality in listening and caring and adjusting. So not pushing a specific agenda, but listening to our needs and meeting us in every present expression of our ministry to help us do faithful work together. And as Mika said, I think as an organization that is queer affirming and is in Texas and is the only queer affirming ministry on our campus, there was a lot that we needed in terms of understanding and language that other organizations couldn't offer us. Mika and Aaron were bought in from the beginning, and they were able to communicate using the language that would align with ours to meet us in this really nuanced specific space of trying to communicate sort of across this gap of students being here and donors being here about how to bring those two groups together. So in our 3 or 4 months of work around the feasibility study, I think we began to see this work as more than just sort of research or listening, but really as ministry, because Mika and Aaron were meeting with our donors. They were communicating this bold vision of where we felt like God was leading us, and then helping us to connect and deepen those relationships, and bringing our donor base into our ministry to make them feel like this was not just for college students, but also had something that would impact them. So yeah, I think in general, I'm just feeling really grateful. We got our feasibility study report back in December, and we've spent a lot of time as a board processing the report. As Mika alluded to, we didn't have the numbers, right? We didn't have the data that justified doing a capital campaign. And part of that is that we are in the middle of Dallas, and real estate is ridiculously expensive. And so we knew from the beginning that this was sort of risky and a big goal. But I think there's been some relief in knowing that even though the goal is not going to be met by a capital campaign at this point, that this work reinvigorated our donor base. They are so excited and energized. And I think by doing this work, we've shown them that we are really serious about both the ministry we're doing, but also the work of building sustainability as an organization, and that we're asking these questions. How can we do this differently? So where we are now is that we have set the capital campaign aside, but we're excited to continue working with Vandersall. We're going to do some work around annual campaigns and just build that robust system of what it looks like to make an organization like this one sustainable into the future. And that is also a huge, huge, huge gift. So yeah, I feel grateful.
Thank you. I had a bunch of questions and you just answered them all. So thank you.
You're welcome.
It's great to have your story here.
You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about what you said, Jesse, leads us to our next question, which is really wanting to make sure that there's trust amongst donors, and making sure that you're leaning into when is the right moment. One of the questions that Mika and I often are asked is, you know, a lot has happened the past few years. There's a lot of unknowns even as we move forward. And is now an ethical time to run a capital campaign, especially at this moment in the economy? Now, I want to be clear that there are some folks out there who would say unequivocally, yes, of course. Now there's never a bad time for a capital campaign.
Always the time.
Always the time. Always the time. We had Vandersall Collective believe in telling the truth at all, and coming to you all with deep integrity. And the answer is truly, it depends. It actually really depends on a number of different factors. And so, in all honesty, not all capital campaigns will be appropriate at this moment. And that is the hard truth. If a campaign will cause injury, if it'll cause shame, if it'll cause spiritual harm, then this is not the moment for a capital campaign. There have been clients that have come to us with wonderful visions, but the community just wasn't ready to move forward for a variety of different reasons. Ethically, as leaders and as consultants, one should only run a capital campaign if there's emotional, volunteer, and financial support for a capital campaign, and it will improve the emotional and spiritual health of the faith community or congregation, and the leadership has the capacity for the initiative. So that is a bit of the contextual piece that answers, is it ethical? Now, I do want to name something that's important, which is that we really utilize data in making our decisions. We always use concrete data rather than anecdotal information. And to that end, we have witnessed time and time again moments where the national landscape has provided significant opportunities for generosity. So, for example, going back to history, oftentimes we think about the Greatest Depression the Great Depression, not the greatest. Is there ever a greatest depression? I think not. The Great Depression, right? And we think about all of the different characteristics that have come from that we see of those of that generation. Food scarcity was huge. The ways in which, as a whole, there were collective norms that developed, right? What we often don't hear about, though, was what happened to, they weren't called nonprofits at that point. They were called community chests. The term nonprofit didn't exist back then. But
is there in Monopoly, there's community chest is one of those squares. Is that
exactly, you named it. Exactly. So back then, community chests existed that would allow for social services, the way that the common good would be cared for. And what records show is that community chests saw a 14% increase the first year of the Great Depression. Fast forward into the first year of the pandemic, where everybody was thinking that we were going to take a huge hit across all nonprofits. And we saw a significant USA Giving, which does the national report giving, saw up to an 8% increase in giving across. So I want to name that actually there is a counterintuitive relationship with the economy that happens, where oftentimes when the market shows moments of fluctuation and instability, it's when people actually rise to the occasion of the greatest opportunity to give. So just because you see that there's something happening nationally doesn't mean that it's an automatic no. Rather, you have to ask the questions that I just raised of individually, what is right for your community? To that end, then, I want to talk about one particular faith community that had to ask these important questions. Calvary Episcopal Church is located in downtown Memphis. And you have a chance today to meet the Reverend Catherine Bush, who is the associate rector there. Calvary Episcopal Church was deeply invested in some improvements. However, there were 3 different starts and stops to a potential capital campaign that took place over a decade, including the stop that took place at the start of the pandemic. Catherine is just wrapping up her time as chair of the Spiritual Emphasis Committee of a really healthy solicitation effort. Deeply grounding, and she has a deeply smart presence. Her job has been to keep us connected to the why of this campaign. So to give you a bit of a taste of the work that we have done together, I am going to show you a little video of their case for support for the solicitation phase. So Mika, can you show us that? All right. This is the handy dandy door that opens us to the website. The door is designed to reflect their logo as well as what their new door to their entry space will be. Here we have a letter from the chairs, and this is all available on their website. We also have the projects laid out as well as videos. This will show you their proposed plans. We'll make sure to align each one of the potential projects with their identity, because we don't just raise money to raise money. We want to make sure that it is aligned with who they are. Here you will see their goal. There's a pledge card available. And then the gifts that are needed in order to move forward. We also have included planned giving effort as part of what they needed. We wrapped that into the entirety. So Catherine, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Can you describe a bit of the starts and stops of Calvary and talk to us about why the moment was right ethically to move forward with a capital campaign in your congregation?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation and to tell you about the joy that it has been to work with these good folks. I actually came along when some of the work was already in process, and certainly the deeper history that Aaron alluded to. So the last time that Calvary did big capital improvements was about 30 years ago. And over the last 2 or 3 decades, there were, as she said, several moments where Calvary got to the brink. We definitely knew there was need, definitely knew that there was work to do, that things, that people had hopes and dreams. And at least 3 different times we got to that place where we were standing, at the edge of the bridge, as it were, and either there was a significant leadership change or a housing market crash, say, for example, in 2008, COVID, you might have experienced. So there were these externals, right? And some internals, some definitely in the life of Calvary that said like, oh, we see this, we want to do this, but this is not the right time. We can't move forward. So in working this, when we got to this campaign that we are in the midst of and nearing the end of, the work of that began as we were coming out of COVID. It's so weird to talk about whether or not we're out of COVID or not, but
I totally get it. Yep.
You guys, everybody who's listening knows what I mean.
Yeah.
So that then there was a sense that we had, as they have outlined, the leadership was there, the congregational need was there, the articulation of the vision was there, and people were ready. And that was affirmed very clearly in the feasibility work that Vandersall led us through.
Thank you. That's beautiful. One of the things that Mika and I deeply believe is that we see theology as the way that God moves in the world and moves in communities, both individually and as a collective. And I know that that's something that you very much contributed significantly to the campaign, was really making sure that we remained connected to the theology, the why of the campaign. Could you share a little bit more about that with us?
Sure. So first, I'll start with a confession, as seems appropriate in this space, to say,
bring on the confessions.
Bring on the confessions. When it was described to me that there would be a spiritual emphasis component to this campaign, I was like, I don't know what that. Well, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that means. I've been peripherally connected to other campaigns with other institutions in the past, and that was not something that was built into the work. So I was intrigued and delighted and curious, and as were the people that then I reached out to within our community to come and join me in that work. And we were all like, what does this even mean? and what it means is that we stayed grounded. We stayed present to the work of God. We stayed open in prayer. It means that we stayed open in scripture, and that holy texts were part of everything that we did, and not in a kind of like a, let's slap a piece of scripture up here on this sign, but no, this is why and how. And this is what it's all for. So that was a place of deep curiosity for me when we were building all the, there were all these different teams that were part of the work as they have outlined, and that there was this conversation was embedded in every moment. There's not a group that met, there was not an event that happened where there wasn't a reminder that we are doing sacred work. Right. That we are the people of God in this world, and this is not just another money-raising event.
Preach it, just preach it. I love that. One of the things also that is really beautiful, that I think that you and a number of the leaders engaged in, and I want to affirm you too, is that oftentimes when we raise money, this really brings up money narratives for individuals, and there becomes a lot of pastoral care that's required. People carry in their bodies shame of previous money narratives, and especially within a church, there's the questions of, well, what does God think about money? What does God think about me who may or may not have money? And I think that was something also that was really helpful, was the ways in which you provided opportunities for care and support for your community, so that we weren't just raising money, but that we were exploring these money narratives together.
There was a lot of teaching that happened, and a lot of teaching that happened in really overt, concrete ways, like let's have a class about this, or let's talk about this. And then conversationally and pastorally, and not just my part, and not even just the spiritual emphasis team's part, but empowering everybody who was involved in soliciting and asking and telling a story, that all of us were had to do our own personal work.
That's right.
And then be ready to meet other people and acknowledge, what seems like things you don't talk about, or seems like something that doesn't belong in certain rooms or in certain contexts. And it was deeply moving and energizing, and really there's a lot of air that came into the conversations around money for people as individuals and for us as an institution as well. One of the things that's true about Calvary and is that it's an old parish, and our location we're still in our historic building, and Memphis has changed around us. And so our physical space and the people who come here represent, in actuality, the full spectrum of American society, from unsheltered neighbors to the wealthiest members of our community. And we all come here to 102 North 2nd together. And so there's just been some really some hard and some beautiful work that's happened in that.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that Mika and I loved was the Sunday after the kickoff. There was just such a huge outflowing of membership engagement. It seemed as though worship is continuing to increase.
It's been amazing. So if you one of the things that those of you who are listening will hear about is, this is about engaging your whole community and not just, raising dollars. And that is so accurate. The touch points, the conversations, the party that we had, which was just fabulous, the kickoff party, all of that has built and really rebuilt in that kind of post-COVID way of people who hadn't been around as much, or were watching online and weren't coming in person, or hadn't had a chance to hug somebody in a really long time that they hadn't seen from, the last time somebody got married or buried. Yeah. So there was a real sense of, we had a party on Friday night, and the kickoff party, and that Sunday we ran out of communion bread at the rail because we hadn't had those numbers in our pews, and so we're scrambling in the sacristy, but it was a beautiful scramble.
It's a great problem to have.
Yes.
So transparently, for all of the folks that are watching, one of the reasons why we wanted to have both you and Jesse, in addition to being really, frankly, very articulate, gifted leaders in your communities, is that you both represent also very diverse ministries, right? You've got Jesse, who's got a ministry start of 4 years, and Catherine, your congregation has been around for hundreds of years and have very different challenges, frankly, of the makeup. And I think that is important to Mika and I, because we believe that how we do the work needs to reflect who you are, right? Because this is your ministry. Catherine, and actually, Jesse, I'm going to invite this of you too. Could each of you speak a bit about how the way that we went about the work with you all reflected who you were?
Yeah, our Calvary's mission in the world is to make God's love visible in downtown Memphis.
Yeah,
that's what we do. That's our call.
Spoiler, it does a really great job.
And we have moments where we are able to do that. And so much of the campaign and the work and the conversations, both kind of off stage and on stage, has they returned to the design of our hopes for our building is about visibility. it is about being, as Scott, our rector likes to say, a lighthouse on the edge of a sea for people to find respite in this place, and then not only to be drawn here, but then to be sent back out. And again, the question that Mika and Aaron and Ray have brought to us is not, could you do this more like Vandersall?
Right.
But how can we do this more like Calvary?
Mm-hmm.
What is Calvary? What is the personality of Calvary? How does it need to be expressed? So
Thank you. And Jesse?
Yeah, I think for us, the really unique thing about the work that we do is that as a campus ministry, we are never going to be in a position where the majority of our funds are raised through stewardship of the community, right? Like, we're working with college students. And so I think that just in general puts us in a really interesting place to talk about development and fundraising, but also to talk about capital campaigns, because we're not talking about the folks from within the heart of our community giving those gifts, making those pledges. And so I think the real gift for us in working with Vandersall was that they were able to connect a lot of the dots that we were seeking to connect between really the heart of our community and those that we serve on a regular basis, and the folks can be the surrounding community. And just really doing a lot to connect the dots and make those more peripheral folks who are giving into the ministry feel like they were part of it. And I think that's just a really strange circumstance that was a gift to have that connection made.
I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit, Jesse, because I think there is some wisdom out there that I don't think that we adhere to at Vandersall, which says people will give just because you've asked, whereby we say, no, if we see this as a ministry, we need to seek out what are the needs and the characteristics and the desires of the people that are being asked, and how do we reflect that in the way we do that. Which is a great segue to our next question, which is this: what makes church capital campaigns different from nonprofit capital campaigns? We get asked this a lot. And I want to say that we do work with nonprofits that oftentimes are ones that meet regularly or are a small knit community. And we certainly see that as very much connected to our work as well. So what makes these types of campaigns different than, say, a Red Cross campaign or a hospital campaign or a school campaign? And the answer is, one, people are regularly meeting. And so the group of people that you are seeking to raise funds from have far more interaction with you than, say, if you were on an alumni board or if you were on a hotel campaign. And that is both a opportunity, but it also requires care, and it requires nuance and a different way, a different approach. Specifically, if it's faith-based, people hold narratives about God and their works that play out differently in this context. Also, especially amongst different generations, leaders can hold a different level of authority. Priests in particular oftentimes are, for better or for worse, equated with the divine. Oftentimes I've heard people say, we think our minister is either Jesus or Satan. And there tends to be not much of a humanity that's applied. Well, we don't adhere to that. We don't believe that. We believe that leaders are human. We do understand that there is a level of authority that is granted to the priest or minister or leader of a faith community that is different than that of a CEO or an executive director. Also, the leadership knows oftentimes far more personal details about the lives of the people that are worshiping in community. And there's a trust that is given to those that have that authority that we have to honor and hold, and that our strategies play out and reflect that understanding that is different than a regular nonprofit. And there's a lot of bad theology out of there that we know and we can point to, and that we are really careful not to include, understanding this particular dynamic. Finally, what makes church capital campaigns different? all gifts of all sizes are important to this work. And so because of this, we really seek to honor gifts that are held from all of the different diversity that you find in your faith community. So Mika, if we're thinking about what makes us different, one of the things that I know that you and I believe is that there is not one right way to do this work. Oftentimes we hear the word of best practices, but we are also mindful of the relationship of whiteness and how whiteness can often be equated with rightness. And we seek to unpack that and how we do our work together. And one of the ways that we make that evident is that we believe that your communities within have great wisdom that needs to be learned and shared. So while we are walking alongside, we work together with you to make sure strategies are right for you. And our design materials, which Mika will be presenting, are not from a template. They're created specifically for you. One of the questions that was raised in the chat was, how do you address and comfort and reassure members of your community who don't believe that you can meet your financial goal? Well, that's one of the reasons why we provide holistic data to support anything we move forward. And what is holistic data? That's both quantitative, so statistical data in a feasibility study or in the listening phase, as well as qualitative data. We provide both themes and thematic words and ways in which the community is emerging with wisdom, as well as clear statistical data that points you in the right direction, as was done with Jessie and her community. Finally, we utilize what might be considered a progressive theology of giving, although many might say that our progressive theology of giving is deeply biblical as well. So Mika, can you walk us through some of the materials that we utilize that show the ways that we reflect our clients?
Sure. And just to add, Erin, to what you've already so beautifully said, that the church work that we do also, I believe, really extends to all communities that are close-knit. Not just Christian communities that gather, whether on a campus or in a sanctuary, in a building that's hundreds of years old, but also those people who have committed themselves to a community that they consider their home in one way or another. And so we love getting to know people deeply and intimately in our time together in ways that we never would be able to do if we did capital campaigns for organizations that don't gather on a regular basis for one way or another. And so I think that reality is reflected in our campaign materials that we put together as well. I want to show you two examples quickly, and then we'll move into question and answer here. This is from Nevilleson Chapel at St. Peter's Church in Manhattan, which is a Lutheran church that holds a chapel created by Louise Nevilleson, a Jewish sculptor and artist. She did this in the 70s after close to the end of her life. And this chapel is one of the few existing sculptural environments left in the world. And there are many different ways that people engage with the chapel. They can come in through an art history lens, a spiritual lens, an architecture lens. And so what we did here for the case, you can see that there's all these materials, the budgets, the lists of leadership, the plans, so on and so forth. But then we sent our donors individual little chapels that they could create in their home where the light can come through, just as it does in the chapel itself. So this was the basis of our case statement for Nevilleson Chapel. This comes from Holy Communion Episcopal Church in University City, Missouri. So this is a congregation who's actually just recently coming back to do some more work together. So we love being able to deepen our work over time. So this is a congregation whose core value is diversity, and its community represents gender, neurodivergent, racial, and economic diversity. And as they were connecting their core values with the space that was around them, they realized that their windows were, just to be blunt, of old white men, stained glass windows, who also represented colonizing forces. So they needed to change that in order for space to truly be welcoming. And with their capital campaign, they sought not only to ensure that their space reflected their core values by making it accessible to all physically, but they changed their windows so that their biblical stories are reflected in, so that their biblical stories are reflected in the windows, reflecting the diversity of their people. So you can see how different these materials are, and how different the communities are, and taking the particularities of the beauty of these communities and bringing them into communication pieces where they are reflected and where they can see themselves. Okay, we've done a lot of talking here. And so now is time for some questions. And we've got a question from Todd here. Go into the Q&A and put some other questions in there as well. As y'all are putting questions in, I just want to remind you that on March 2nd at 1 o'clock, there will be a talk back time for us to dig more into your own particular communities. And also after our time together today, we'll be sending out a handout for you to have in your sermon and as a resource. So any other things, I think, especially for Catherine and Jesse, around this question of how did you address and comfort and reassure the members of your community who don't believe that you can meet your financial goals? And I would even add, Todd, I don't even know you, but I'm going to add to your question, and might not even think the campaign's a good idea.
This may be, and this may be kind of getting around to Todd's question, but one of the things that's been true for our experience over really the last, mostly the last calendar year of this work, from feasibility, some more planning, and then the fall and the winter campaign to where we are right now, which is coming toward the end of the congregational phase, is that in that 12-month period, the American economic system revealed its precarity, and the stock market has been up and down. There, wars and rumors of wars, as the saying goes. And the other thing that's been true, not just kind of at that larger level for our larger society, but Memphis has been visited upon another symptom of what is, kind of a crisis in our country, which is that we've actually just in the last few weeks been through a very public event of a man who was killed by a police brutality, a beating that led to his death. It wasn't a shot, but it was a beating that days later resulted in Tyre Nichols' death. And those stories and the larger period of time in which we're all, kind of, again, moving out of a place of this post-pandemic moment, whatever it is, political and otherwise implications, has meant that there's been a temptation to turn to fear and anxiety. And we as a church want to offer that those feelings of despair are real. Not that we don't deny that those feelings are not there, but that we want to offer something to that, right? To offer hope, to offer a vision. And it's actually been a real gift to be telling the story of a future-focused, hopeful-oriented Calvary. It might seem like the worst time in the world to be talking about raising money for an old church, but it's actually been incredibly life-giving and affirming and reassuring to people to say, no, there's a bigger story here. That perspective shift of where we are in time and God's embrace. It's been in a way that seems to really counterintuitive, and I would not have predicted the best possible time to be talking about how we make God's love visible and more visible and more visible and more visible.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Anything to add, Jesse? You don't have to.
That was lovely, Catherine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really
And
good.
we're done.
And we're back. The only thing I'll say is that I think that the gift of working with Vandersal is that they are able to hold space for difficult conversations. And that was a real gift for me, because most of our donors are folks that I have had pre-existing relationships with as their pastor or in a pastoral role. And so, you know, when we made a list of who we wanted to interview and survey, you know, Mika and Aaron and it encouraged us to include curmudgeons, right? Folks who were not on board. And I think what I learned in that process of them hearing the feedback that folks had is that I had made a lot of assumptions about who was in what category, who was really bought in, who was a curmudgeon, and my assumptions were not correct, right? Like they were often thwarted. Folks who I thought were really on board with our vision said, well, I actually have a lot of concerns, or not concerns, but questions or thoughts. I mean, we had a lot of people trying to solve all of our problems, which is always fun. So I think that that's a real gift too, of having sort of folks to accompany you through this work, is that there's some neutrality there in terms of folks being able to say what they really want to say, and get into why there might be resistance. And usually it's not for the reasons that you would expect. I think it goes back to that money narrative work, that there's often fear and anxiety that's unrelated. So that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. There are no other open questions. I know they're there. It's not that they're there, not there. So I hope that you all will see us on the 2nd, and feel free to please email us for any other conversation. Aaron can put our email addresses in the chat, and Ray will send them out to you all after our time together as well. Thank you so much for your time in being with us today. And thank you especially to Catherine and Jesse, who are here telling your stories and in busy, busy times. So looking forward to further conversation, and hope to see you on the 2nd. Thank you all.